we'll make a start. Hello and welcome to the Onward Hub, everyone. I'm Caroline Elsom. I'm head of Reshaping the State at Onward Think Tank, which covers all of our public services. We're here today to cover the really important topic of how to help more people transition off benefits and into employment. I mean, it's hard to have missed all of the alarm bells that have been going off in recent years about the changing scale and the changing profile of people who are working age and on benefits. The costs of the state have absolutely skyrocketed. We've seen a rapid rise in those making disability-related claims, and we've seen an expansion of all the additional benefits that those already claiming universal credit or personal independence payment are able to receive on top of their awards. And alongside the taper, this has led to new cliff edges emerging in the system, which universal credit was meant to take away and make it a much smoother process. So at Onward, we'll be publishing a series of papers later in the year. So this is why it's such a good opportunity to have this event today, so that we can gather everyone's views to feed into it. We're delighted to have been supported in this event by the IPPR, and so I will just run through who's on the panel today. So I'll start with Helen Waitley, the Shadow Secretary of State for Work and Pensions. We have Lana Hempsall, who wears many hats, including being the founder of Conservatives in Energy, a Conservative councillor and a regular commentator in The Spectator, Con Home and elsewhere on everything that's wrong with the welfare system. We have Harry Quilter-Pinner, who is Executive Director of the IPPR, and James Nation, who is Managing Director of Forefront Advisors. So, Helen, I'll come to you first for some opening remarks.
Very good, thank you very much. Well, I'll kick off picking up, as you were outlining, the problem as I see it. I'm going to do that because I think we can't repeat it enough, how serious the problem is that we have with our welfare state at the moment. 10 million people of working age economically inactive. That's around 21% of the UK population. 10 million people of working age on benefits, 1.6 million people unemployed, 5,000 people every day going on to sickness benefits. I mean, I just throw out some of those numbers. Oh, actually, in the young people's number, 1 million young people not in employment, education or training, a number that's rising. And that's a particularly serious figure, because that's people at exactly the stage in life where they should be getting going on their careers, where they should be getting into their first job, getting experience, and actually getting the feeling of earning money and paying your own way in life, gaining responsibility and independence. All those things that, as Conservatives, and I think those are really, really important principles, are the things that make our country a success, are the things that make people's lives worth living, and they're crucial to our economy. And that's actually the other side of it, is we need people to be working. We need people to be, whether they're in jobs or whether they're self-employed and doing their own hustle, but we need people to be contributing to our economy for us to succeed as a country. And we compare ourselves to other countries around the world where people are, frankly, working harder, and more of the population working. We're not going to succeed unless we have our population with their shoulder to the wheel. So that's the problem. What is going wrong? I mean, the area that we've particularly seen this increase is in the rise of people going on to sickness benefits. Does that mean that our country is terribly sick and much sicker than it was in the past? No. And you can dig into this, and yes, okay, you can point to waiting lists, but that's not what's behind this rise in sickness benefits. It's not that the country is getting sicker. Yes, I think there is a thing going on with young people, particularly struggling with anxiety and some mental health, and there's much greater awareness of mental health now. But actually what's going on is it's become much, much easier to access sickness benefits, and particularly much easier to access them with a mental health problem. The sickness benefit system was not designed or thought of in a world in which you had such high levels of mental health awareness, and in which you were attempting to achieve a parity between physical and mental health, which is, indeed something. When we were in government, we were trying to raise the standard of support for people's mental health, but this is something which has, in fact, had a negative consequence and, in essence, backfired in the welfare system. And as a result, you can earn, or rather receive, around £5,000 more a year if you're on sickness benefits than if you are working on the minimum wage. And no surprise, that means for some people, that's a choice that they're making. Whether it's a choice from somebody who genuinely just thinks, you know what, I don't want to work and I know it's quite easy to get on benefits and I can watch a TikTok video about how to do it. Or somebody actually who is struggling and goes and sees a doctor about the fact they're struggling, and the doctor says, well, I'll give you a sick note, very easily done, and here, have a few weeks off work if you're already in it. And actually, becoming a victim, yes, they're struggling with something, but they would be better off in work. And what they need is somebody say to you, yeah, off you go get into work. And hand in hand with that, a financial imperative to go and work, not, oh, and here's money that means you don't really need to get into work. Those incentives really matter, and we need to redesign the system so it's not channeling people into benefits. Instead, what it's doing is expecting and supporting people to get into and be in work. And that's some of what I've been setting out during this conference. If you've been following the announcements about what I call our common sense plan for making welfare savings and getting people working again. And a set of things, firstly, fixing the sick notes, which are often people's way onto benefits, a sick note from the GP. Secondly, requiring assessments for benefits to be face-to-face. If it happens over the phone, no surprises, people just say whatever they've seen that they should be saying. They could even pay to get a VIP service to help them claim benefits and be more successful. So make those things face-to-face. I've visited assessment centres where there are empty rooms, where they used to 15 rooms in the last assessment centre I visited, all empty because everyone now has their assessments, far more assessments now are over the phone. People should be having to come into those rooms for their assessments. If they can't make it in, well, somebody should go and see them where they are to really have that in-person conversation about what's going on. Stop the access to sickness benefits for people with low-level mental health and neurodiversity like ADHD. That's just, there is not an extra cost of life, which is what the PIP system is intended to support for somebody in that situation. Fixed Motability, Lana and I have had many conversations about that. She's been doing some great work on that. And then the other thing we've announced at conference is that sickness benefits should be restricted to people who are British. We shouldn't be giving sickness benefits to people who've got indefinite leave to remain. It's just not something that as a country we can afford and shouldn't be supporting. And that's a set of, and I say that's not all, but I sort of share that with you to put it out there that I've been doing a lot of work on our plan and how we can make real savings on this. And I say as part of that, it's very much about getting British people working rather than being on benefits.
Brilliant. That's a great segue for me to plug a report that we had out earlier in the summer called Loophole Nation, which was about some of the ways that people, before they've got indefinite leave to remain, can navigate the system in order to have their entire stay in the UK funded by all the taxpayers.
Caroline, I should have that was an excellent report, and particularly this thing of when people become destitute, then they get access to benefits when they weren't their immigration status wasn't intended to give them access to benefits
without even having to show their bank records or any sort of evidence they are in fact destitute. So thank you very much.
Excellent report.
Lana, I'll come to you for some opening remarks now.
Okay, thanks Caroline, and thanks Helen. Really appreciate that. So, 380 billion. Yeah, 380 billion. That's what Britain is going to spend on welfare by 2030 every single year. And that is a huge and quite frankly unaffordable amount of money for the government to find. That amount of money is more than double what we spend on defence, housing and policing in this country. And not only is this a tragedy for our country, it's also a tragedy for every single person who is trapped on benefits, who could be working, who could be fulfilling themselves, who could be supporting their family. And that's the cost of our welfare system. It's a system that seems to perpetuate dependence. In fact, not perpetuate, but almost encourage that dependence. And we have to find a way out of it. Now, some of you in this room may have noticed that I have no paper, no notes in front of me. And that's because I was registered blind when I was a teenager. So people assume what I can't do, and that's not new to me. When I was given my diagnosis, I was also given my options, which were between slim and none. I was told I could either weave baskets or operate a switchboard. And that narrow view of disability still shapes much of how our welfare system works today, because it defines people by what they can't do rather than asking what they can do. There are lots of people with severe disabilities who will never work and will have to depend on others for the rest of their life. And for those people, our support and our generosity has to be guaranteed. But with over 3,000 applications daily for sickness benefits, most of those are for mental health conditions, we have to start drawing a line. We have to be honest. Most mental health conditions are simply not serious enough to merit extra disability payments. A lot of those individuals need health professional support and not extra money. And then there's the issue of people who have disabilities who want to work but can't because the system simply traps them into dependency. It is far easier to sign on to benefits than it is to battle the system back into work. Kemi said, we are now a welfare state with an economy attached, and she is absolutely right. And that system is not sustainable, and it's not Britain's future. We have to find a better way. And the system was designed, it was designed with the best of intentions. The Motability Scheme. The Motability Scheme was set up back in the 70s in order to give people access to transport, to get them places, to get them to live a fuller life. But I started looking into this when I was personally, with a sight issue, I was sent a letter from Motability encouraging me to apply for one of these vehicles. So I thought I'd have a look, right? I presumed that these vehicles would be for the severely disabled people and that would be it. And the truth is so much different. There are over 800,000 vehicles on our nation's roads right now that are Motability vehicles. Only 30,000 of those are adapted. 30,000. And that 800,000 is a 200,000 rise since 2020. And most of that rise is due to the eligibility being extended to people with mental health conditions. Now, setting aside the perverse psychology of giving somebody with schizophrenia a free car, some of those vehicles have been given to people with conditions such as tennis elbow, depression, and even acne. The Motability Scheme is symbolic of what is wrong with our system, set up with the best of intentions, but has morphed into something that now costs this country almost £3 billion a year. They have over 4.1 billion in reserves last time I checked, and the chief executive draws a salary of over £500,000 a year. Our welfare system has to change because long-term dependency can't be the norm. We have to stop this idea that work is difficult, because work is what gives us a sense of identity, a sense of purpose, and a sense of worth. And our welfare system has to reflect our national values, which are effort, aspiration, and responsibility. And it is clear that Labour haven't got a clue how to address this issue. So it's going to fall to us, to the Conservatives, to come up with a better answer, because Britain deserves better.
Thank you, Lana. Actually, I found out about a new quirk of the Motability Scheme a couple of days ago, which might be of interest to some of you driving home from conference, that you can get the M6 toll waived if you're in a Motability car. So that's another one that I hadn't even heard about before.
And congestion charge.
Nice
And congestion charge. Harry, I'll come to you next for some opening thoughts.
Fantastic. Thank you, and thanks to Onward for partnering on this event. We're really delighted to work with you, as always. So I agree with much of what's been said, both about the scale of the problem and about the damage that leaving so many people out of work is doing, both to our economy across the whole of the country, but also obviously to individuals and families. So a lot of agreement on the problem. So I'm not going to focus too much on that. I'm going to try and turn us to some of the solutions. And I also agree, by the way, that most people, the best route out of poverty, the best route to a meaning and fulfilling life is work, even if that is not the same for everyone. There may be people with disabilities who can't work in the same intensity or the same careers as lots of other people, but some form of work or purposeful activities is going to be the right way forward. So I think the goal is the right one. I think in thinking about the solutions, there's clearly a big debate about the balance between getting the incentives right in the system and then getting the support right. And I think both of those things are important. So clearly, hundreds of years of economics shows that if it pays vastly less to do something, you're less likely to do it. So we need to make work pay, and we need to make sure that the benefit system is designed in such a way that the incentives are for people who can to go into work, and there's still a lot of work we can do on that, and that should involve some level of conditionality, as in you need to show that you are trying to get into work and you're contributing in order to access the benefits that we have in this country. So I think there's still work to be done there. I think the concern that I have about some of this debate, though, is that it treats humans as though they are just an economic agent. If we just get those incentives right, we will solve this problem. And obviously what we know is from all of our lives is that there's a whole load of complex reasons why we might do something or not do something. And in particular with the group of people we're talking about who are on inactivity benefit or on disability benefit, there are really complex reasons why getting into work is more challenging. That might be a health condition and how to manage a long-term health condition. That might be caring responsibilities, both children and sometimes older parents as well. It might be confidence or skills. And so we need to make sure that the debate we're having recognises that if those barriers are significant and we're not able to support people to overcome them, the incentives will not be enough on their own to actually fix this problem. And we know that even in that group of people who are currently economically inactive, 7 in 10 say they want to work. So we're pushing an open door, but we need to make sure we've got the support in place to help them. So 2 proposals here about how we might go about this. The first is on prevention. And I wanted to just slightly pull up Helen on one point, which was just that sickness is getting worse. It's not getting worse. The people flowing onto benefits is faster than that. So there's a problem over and above that. But our population is in worse health than it has been in recent decades. And so part of this is about helping people to prevent them from getting sick to a point in which they are falling out of the labour market. And I think one proposal that we've looked at is how to help employers to play a greater role in doing that, because we know that once you've left employment, it's much harder to get back in, and employers can play a really good role and are across the country. So we're proposing something called a health premium, which would basically be a cut to NI and employers' contribution to those firms that can demonstrate that they're doing the things that we know help people to stay in work, including the support that employers might give after someone's been on statutory sick for a while, or training to line managers to help dealing with some of these issues. There's a whole host of things that we know helps work. And we know that some employers are doing that, but a lot aren't. And how can we encourage that to be more widespread? And then on the other side, once people have fallen out of the labour market, what is it that we can do to support them in addition to the kind of welfare changes? What can we do on the job centre offer to help people get people back into work? And we at IPR were involved with the design of the Kickstart scheme that Rishi Sunak introduced around COVID. There was lots of good evidence about the kind of support in terms of work coaching, including financial incentives to support businesses to take on people that are slightly further from the labour market, where maybe they've got extra costs associated with taking someone into work. The subsidy for that might be quite small compared to the cost of keeping them on the benefits. So there's definitely an opportunity there to design the system differently. So 2, what I would call pro-work and pro-business policy solutions to the challenge that we're facing.
Brilliant. And last but by no means least, James.
Oh gosh, thank you very much, Caroline. I must confess to having a little bit of imposter syndrome being up here, because I'm going to be honest with you. Though I worked in Number 10, I did not work on welfare policy directly, so my team did. So when Caroline gets to the quick fire round of what's the UC taper rate, what are the various work allowances across passported benefits, I'm going to completely fail. But what I thought I would do is maybe just give some wider reflections, maybe touching on other areas of policy that clearly interface with what we're talking about today. So the first point I was going to make is I think there is a clear worry at the moment that I have looking at government policy in the round on entry-level jobs. I think we are getting towards a phase now where we obviously saw a big hike in the living wage last year. We obviously saw the decision around employer national insurance, which I think, if I'm just talking here in my new vantage point of observing things from a kind of economics perspective, precisely the wrong tax to increase, given all of the implications that we've seen since. And look, while we might debate the merits or otherwise of specific measures in the government's employment rights package, the truth is the OBR is yet to score the impact of that and is yet to opine on what that will mean for hiring in certain industries and, like I say, particularly at entry level. Let's see, but I think from the government's own impact assessment there will be some challenges there. So I just worry that at the moment we are looking at a situation at entry level where there isn't a coherence to government policy really, or rather there is a cumulative burden building that makes me very concerned. The second thing I was going to say, and it's already been made, is around the incentives point. And I think, it is welcome, therefore, that the government did seek to address that delta between, the relative generosity of disability benefits and work on UC, but clearly there's much more to do. And here I'm always attracted by, colleagues telling me about some examples of what's done abroad on conditionality around, whether you time limit in certain circumstances, or just introduce greater conditionality, where I think there are some examples abroad that we could easily learn from. And then I think two final points. One would be to say the availability and proximity to jobs and employment, I think, matters here. I don't have data, but my hunch would be on the entry-level side, still kind of proximity and that ability to get to work matters. And therefore, I think you have to be looking here in the round at policy like, what's your travel to work area strategy when you're looking at transport, housing, all of that, I think, plays a role here and is something, again, that is well worth focusing on. And then I think the final point I was going to make actually is devolution, I think, is a whole area that we need to return to, we need to be a bit strategic about. And actually cost control as well. So when you hear a Treasury official mention Amy, the chances are they're not talking about their life partner, they're talking about annually managed expenditure. And as many of you will know, with welfare, we just do not have a good cost control system in place at all. And I think there is easily a case to look at what more you could do to move certain expenditure lines into the Department for Work and Pensions and have that as, their departmental expenditure limit or incorporated within it that is set by the Treasury. But I also think you need to go further, and I think this is one where there is a definite case to double down on devolution, like I said. I don't know, Harry will know, and Caroline will know, and there'll be great stuff that's been put out there, whether we've got actual data on what particular training programmes work or who is best to administer them. My hunch would be DWP sitting in Whitehall are not going to be the best commissioner of this sort of stuff. So therefore, much more proximity, give mayors powers, give others powers at local level, engaging with employers to design these kind of training schemes, building off Kickstart that we think and that we know are going to work. And there's a bit of a policy coherence challenge here as well, right? Because when we look at the government's recent announcement on the youth guarantee, coupled with the removal of the university's target to allow more room for apprenticeships, well, it was only, 18 months ago or beyond that Bridget Phillipson was talking about, broadening the apprenticeships levy, i.e. diluting the support that goes towards apprenticeships. So again, there just needs to be a bit of, central government needs to decide what it sees its role as in terms of, channeling funding towards various training routes. But in terms of schemes that are going to help with what we're addressing today, my contention would be there's much more to do on Devo. So there you go. Maybe sort of one step removed from the welfare world, but a few reflections, I hope, of from a Treasury perspective and another policy perspective, other policy perspectives, how we start to address this very real and pressing challenge.
Yeah, really helpful to think about this in a very interconnected way with all the different parts of government involved. Before I come to the floor, so please do get your questions ready. I just wanted to kick off a discussion with a few thoughts. So obviously we had the Labour attempt to do reform to the PIP system earlier in the year that went down in flames and is now going to cost us more money than even slow the rate as was intended. Given that since then there's been a reshuffle, there's a new Secretary of State in DWP now, where do you think Labour can go with welfare reform? What space have they got left? Any thoughts on where they might go? I know, Harry, you were at Labour conference, so maybe you've got the inside track on what might be coming next.
I don't have the inside track. I don't think it takes genius to work out that one of the purposes of the reshuffle was to kind of get Pat McFadden into DWP. They also put skills into DWP, which I think that to me signals there will be another attempt at this. I think they probably recognise that the scale of the problem is such that they can't ignore it for a parliament, which is absolutely spot on. They can't ignore it. The challenge obviously will be the politics of this, as we all know, are really difficult, particularly for the government in terms of their own party. So it'll be navigating how to do this in a way that was more effective than the last one. But I think they can't. I don't think they can avoid it. I think they're going to have to try and do this again, do it properly. And I think there is an interesting. And I think actually this panel, Helen and I were on a panel yesterday, The Spectator again. You know, there are clearly areas of disagreement across the political spectrum, but I think there's enough agreement actually on some of the problems and some of the solutions that they should be able to get a package through. But let's see what happens.
Any thoughts on where's left for them
Well,
to go?
I mean, we've said to them we will help them come up with a savings plan because we think it's very important that the government takes action on this, both to save money rather than putting up taxes for the sake of avoiding an economic doom loop, and also actually because it's a total waste of lives of people sitting on benefits rather than working. So we've made that offer. I've spoken to Pat McFadden. I've said to him actually one of the things I think he should start with is the stopping sickness benefits for common mental health issues, and I've talked to him through why I said that. I think I'm not saying welfare reform isn't easy, but that is very doable. But they do have a challenge with their backbenchers, and I've heard their backbenchers stand up there in Parliament and say, "I didn't get elected in order to cut benefits." So that is what he's dealing with. I said we've said we'd help, and I think there's an imperative for them to do it. So we will see. Can I pick up on Harry's point though? Harry, you said you disagree with me. The Law's Economic Affairs Committee did a really good report on this. It's probably about a year ago, about now, on overall and what was going on with welfare. Short report, very readable. Yeah. And one of the things they did look into was that the rise in welfare is not being driven by ill health, and it's got some links there to look at.
I will go and read it. But also, I actually agree. The rise in people flowing onto the benefit is in excess of any increase in health. My point was actually a wider point, which is just that the evidence is really clear that we're living a longer proportion of our lives in ill health than we were, and that on a whole host of conditions, ill health is actually either stagnating. We were improving for quite a lot of the last century, and that's no longer happening, or in some cases is getting worse. And I think we just need to recognise, particularly with the rising pension age, if we want people to work longer, we're going to have to tackle the prevention piece, which is keeping people healthier for longer, and we're not doing that effectively. So it wasn't...
Well, I can agree we need to tackle prevention and also recognising that health is a genuine reason why some people are struggling to work, and part of the answer is supporting people with their health rather than saying just sit at home and be ill and on benefits.
Yeah, really important point. The healthy life expectancy point is a really crucial one. I think it's around 63, 64 maybe as healthy life expectancy, which is obviously well before retirement age, so we do need to think carefully about what to do about the period where people will spend working before they retire, where they may be in ill health and need support to
And
do
obviously
that.
that's an average, so that means
Yeah,
there's
there'll
a
be a lot
chunk
more
of people that are much worse off.
Of course, sorry, James, I think.
Yeah, I was sorry. No, I love that, by the way, moving towards consensus as well. But yeah, I was just actually going to come back to your question, Caroline, on Labour, and I just wanted to make a sort of tactical point. I mean, it was a complete political failure in terms of how those reforms were delivered. Just to be fair, actually, to Labour MPs, because there was no data provided on what the labour market impact was going to be, how it was going to support job retention. All you had was that impact assessment on relative poverty, and also it was, and I'm sure. I wonder whether you'd agree with this, Harry, but they completely lost control of a narrative as well, because it became a Treasury cost-saving exercise that then got dominated around, the OBR scoring process. So they briefed to the media they wanted 5 billion. The OBR came back with scores on the doors that their package was going to save 3.4, and then they had to do this mad rush at the end to introduce something else to make it add up. And even then, the OBR did not have full information. So my point is, next time, they've got to get the kind of political handling of it right as well. And I just have a little bit of scepticism that the Tim's review is really going to identify meaningful savings in this area. So I think I'm going to say watch this space in terms of whether or not, I don't doubt Pat McFadden's credentials here, but I just think in terms of their ability to have another go and prosecute that argument and fundamentally give their MPs something to sell to people who have very real concerns on the doorstep, I think it's going to be a tall order.
Lana, anything from you on this one, or I'll move on to another question?
Oh no, totally from me on this one. So, I want to bring this all back to so why we're doing all of this and why people need to access money and why we have welfare. And with the greatest respect is the reason is the fact that this has become a Treasury problem is why this failed. And it failed because every single, the backbench MPs have got, the numbers behind them of people who elected them in order to do beautiful things for beautiful people, which is lovely. But the piece that's missing, and they really missed a trick with this, is Labour have actually commissioned the Mayfield report, right, which is supposed to be, which is the part that I really got excited about, which is supposed to address why people with disabilities or sickness, how we access work and how we stay in work. This has been my lifelong struggle. The only person who has ever employed me and paid me well is myself, right? Myself. I've been self-employed, run my own businesses all of my adult life because it's been impossible, especially with the Access to Work scheme as it is, to get the proper support. And that's partly where we need that reform, because the Access to Work scheme, it needs fundamentally overhauling so that employers and businesses, and the way Labour has treated businesses is absolutely abysmal, because they are the ones who are giving people jobs, and we have to support employers in order for them to think creatively about how they can engage the disabled workforce. And with the rise of tech and the rise of AI, that is becoming easier and easier. So if Labour can put, horse and then cart and get the Mayfield report out and get some soundings back from that and how that's actually going to work to support disabled people, backbenchers, and in fact the whole House, they're going to get a lot less pushback from the electorate about the changes that they're wanting to make, when there's light at the end of the tunnel, when there's actual prospects, when people like me, 18-year-olds who are coming through with their diagnosis of, conditions that they're going to have to live with for the rest of their lives, when their parents aren't scared stiff of what the future for their children will hold, that's when the backbench political pressure will stop, because we'll have a better solution on the table.
Brilliant. And that's a perfect segue on to what was going to be my second question before I come to the floor, which was about the Keep Britain Working review, the Charlie Mayfield review, which I think is due out later this month, so not that long to wait. Any thoughts on what sort of recommendations you're hoping to see? Perhaps something on the fit note system improving?
I don't know whether Charlie will come out with anything on the fit note. I mean, it's a huge opportunity. It should. It was something which is long overdue for reform, and the government pulled those reforms when they got elected. So they should do that. And the fact that people are so quickly given a fit note is no help to their employers, who would like to, in fact, often support them to stay and work. But the moment somebody's been given their fit note or sick note, then an employer's not meant to contact them. And I should think this is something that Charlie Murfield will talk about. There's a difference in other countries where if somebody goes off sick in other countries, their employer follows up with them to see how they are and what support they can have. And in some countries, that's part of an employer's obligations, is to reach out and support people to be able to be well enough to get back to work. Compared to our system, which is very much, if someone goes off sick, leave them alone until they are ready to come back. So there's definitely opportunity there. And it's a thing that I hear again and again from businesses at the moment, is because the government's put up national insurance and because they're bringing in the Employment Rights Bill, they're just making everything harder and harder for businesses. So where businesses used to be able to spend some extra money on supporting people's health, and whether it was sort of counsellors or physio, whatever it was, actually now they're having to really tighten their belts, and things that were discretionary spending, they're not necessarily going to be able to spend any more, or they're shifting from having people employed but with support in place to more self-employed models where it's up to you to sort out your access to healthcare. So the problem is, if you're going to ask more of businesses, you've got to be backing businesses, not making life harder for businesses.
Mm-hmm. Brilliant. Okay, we'll come to the floor now, so do get your hands up, and please do keep it as brief as possible so we can get in plenty of you. Come to the gentleman over here first, and then we'll take the two ladies on the front row, the first one and the third one. Thanks.
Nick Morland. Sorry. I run a business called Tenacious Labs, but we also operate around the world. As a background piece, my father lived with me for the last 40 years, and obviously I lived with him before that. He had multiple sclerosis. We hire disabled people all the time. It's almost impossible to do so in the UK. It's easier in Zimbabwe. They make better employees because they go off sick less, and they stay for longer. So it's entirely commercially valid. It also, in terms of putting a team together, it's very effective. It keeps people from having small squabbles, because if you've got somebody in a wheelchair around the corner, it just gives a bit of perspective. So from the point of view of somebody who hires people, they are an asset rather than the reverse. So it's background. But my question for you guys is, with 40% drop post-AI and read accountings jobs and things like that, we're hiring a quarter of the number of the graduates now. And if I talk to the people who would be hiring otherwise, they're viewing sick as universal living wage by the back door. It is now entirely socially acceptable to be gaming the system, and it's something they will show off about. How on earth does any government, irrespective of whether it's left, right, middle, or whatever, get that through when they are now a significant voting bloc?
Brilliant. Okay, we'll take the two ladies on the front here, the first one and then the third one along.
Thank you. My name's Emma, and I manage two different charities, actually, and there was a couple of, it is two questions, I'm ever so sorry. One is around volunteering and how we encourage people into volunteering as a way of helping them get into a routine and therefore off benefits, because they will have experience that they can go into a job. And then the second point was, when we do get people into work, how do we make that pay? So my niece, she had a job and then she couldn't actually afford it because the cost to get to work, and then the fact that her benefits were reduced meant she was actually worse off in effect. So how can we stop that cliff edge to help people keep in work, so that they are taking slightly less benefits, but they still will need some benefits?
Hi there, I'm Jackie O'Sullivan from the learning disability charity Menka. So a really interesting discussion. Employment rates for people with a learning disability is shockingly low. Officially, it's 5% and has been really static. Our research shows it's a bit higher, probably in the 20s, but still really, really, really low. We also know that 85% of people without a job who have a learning disability want to work, and that the benefit system is the biggest barrier. But it's fear of the benefit system, because every interaction they've had over decades has only gone one way. So how do we do reform whilst giving people the reassurance that actually if the job doesn't work out, if everything goes wrong, and it could well do given the level of support that people need, and absolutely problems with access to work. How do we give people the reassurance that they're going to be okay if it doesn't work out?
Brilliant. Okay, so we've got questions about system gaming, about volunteering, about how to make work pay, learning disabilities and fear of the system. So lots to dig into. Harry, would you like to kick off?
Yeah, I might just take the kind of volunteering and the last question as well. One of the things the government has talked about is this kind of right to try proposal, and I think there's a lot of questions about how you design that so that works. But I think the ethos behind that is right, which is at the moment we have an issue, which is that if you move on to incapacity or if you move on to disability, there is very little incentive to re-engage with trying to work, and you actually move people further away from the prospect of working. And often the support is not there to help them to do that, and there's a huge fear that if they try and do that, they will lose their benefits. And so I think one of the, when you look at the studies of like what works for these cohorts of people where actually the challenge of getting people back into work is much harder, one of the things that those studies show is most effective is where there is a kind of middle ground between being on the benefit and then being in work, where there's both support for the employer and for the individual for making that transition work. And I think, you know, there's a balance to be struck with, like, some element of conditionality is positive. You know, there needs to be some kind of incentive to get people back into work. But if you create so much fear around it that people, you know, are so scared of engaging that they would, you know, they end up kind of pulling away from that. So I think a lot of the system design has to be about how do you treat people as humans and provide the support for them to make those kind of difficult steps into work. And that means also in supporting the employer to do that as well, because they will often kind of think, what support, you know, do we need? This is more complex than we want to get involved in. Let's not do this. And so I think it's both putting in support for the individual and the person, and the right to try concept, I think, needs to be designed well, but I think could be part of the solution to some of those challenges.
Brilliant. James, take your pick from any of those questions.
I was just going to say, as a general principle, it sort of strikes me, again, somewhat removed, but just observing, there should be a hard obligation to engage with the system, but the actual system itself needs to be, you know, an actual fruitful experience that we think is going to result in a beneficial outcome, which in this case would be, you know, someone either finding work or staying in work. So I think that comes back to some of the points that Helen was making earlier around, it seems completely counterproductive to me that you have assessments over the phone, that is a very, you know, kind of a-personal process, when that should be, you know, you would have thought if trained correctly and focused on correctly, you could make work coaches into quite an inspiring career path. So I think that is something well worth focusing on, and it ties in with what I was saying earlier as well about the real quality of some of these programs and whether they are better delivered and administered at local level. Now, I just was going to pick up on the, I thank you very much for sharing what you shared. I actually think this is one area where it'd be interesting to see what Charlie Mayfield says, because I obviously agree on the burdens of government policy on businesses at the moment, but I also think, you know, those points around culture, what, you know, businesses do in terms of, you know, making provision for, but also ensuring that, you know, for disabled members of staff, it's a great place to work. I think that would be really interesting to see what Charlie has to say. And then I think your point just comes back to me for the debates we always used to have over the UC taper and over, you know, the extent to which you try and smooth out some of those cliff edges without, though, you know, seeing no real cost control on the overall bill, because that is the ultimate challenge as well at the other side. So those are just some kind of various reflections in response to those really thoughtful questions and insights.
Lana?
Yeah, so without wanting to repeat what others have said, which I broadly agree with, we have an issue because jobs come from employers, comes from business. So no DWP budget, apart from employing civil servants, is going to boost that jobs market. You know, we have gone down from 1.2 million vacancies, job vacancies, down to just over 600,000. That's not good news for disabled people. It just isn't. So we have to, so the foundation of this is to have a confident economy with lots of jobs. And we also have to move away from that concept that disabled people only need and get entry-level jobs. That's simply not true. There are many disabled people with educations that far exceeding my own. Jean-Andre Preger is one of them, who exceptionally talented individual.
Amazing.
Who who is. He's not going to be volunteering, unless he really wants to. I think the one thing I would say about volunteering is I know that there is a place for it. However, I have seen far too often disabled people simply pigeonholed into a place where they're just not getting paid. And I'm sorry, that's not good enough. And I fundamentally object to that pigeonholing and that approach. It's okay when it comes to reintroduction, but it's not good enough for the long term. So thank you.
Helen?
Yes, I pick up and Nick on your sort of point about the cultural challenge, and it's definitely true. When I was in Newcastle recently doing a visit to various organisations that support people into work, and they were describing one guy that they were supporting who was the first person in his family to work for quite a while. He was the only person in the household working. I think he was the son, so he was living with sort of mum and dad and grown-up siblings. And he started work, and his alarm clock was going off at 7:30 each morning to wake him up to go to work. And his family started complaining about the fact that his alarm clock was waking them all up. And this was making it hard for him to keep on going to work. He was getting a lot of grief from the rest of his family. Why the hell are you waking us up so you can go to work, Why can't you be like the rest of us? But he was being supported by a fantastic charity, which make it their business to help people get into and stay in work. Actually, this is one of the really crucial messages they said to me is, the whole battle is not getting the job. Actually, that's just the start. Then there's actually keeping the job when the going gets tough. Turning up on a Monday morning after you had a good night on a Sunday evening with your friends. If you're not from a background and with in the habit of showing up. So and the answer to this from certainly from the work I've been doing does come into a huge amount of support for people who are not in the way of working. And essentially, whether it's somebody from a charity, almost being a job of a mum or dad, as I do with my teenagers when I make them go and do holiday jobs, and my son says, "Oh, I can't do this again," fruit picking, quite hard, and I'm like, "No, you will be there at 5:30 in the morning tomorrow because you have signed up to do this job, and you're going to get up and I will pull you out of bed if I need to." But, that is, and actually, I'm not suggesting that, but in the days gone by, sometimes that's what employers actually would do. If somebody didn't turn up for work, they'd go round their house. It's what used to be done in my area in Kent. If you were a fruit farmer and you had a crew of people from the local village who were meant to be picking your fruit, and whatever lad didn't turn up, you'd go around the house and put them. Now, I'm not suggesting that would be our policy, but what I'm saying is actually there is this real support that is needed. And actually pick up on your point, James, it's not something that government's going to design for what that support should be. It is going to come from local organisations who know their communities really well to change what has become a habit in the norm in some communities.
Brilliant. Okay, we'll take some more questions now. Let me go. I'll start from the back. Gentleman with his hand up at the back, then the lady standing up with her hand up, and then Ryan, one row in front.
Richard O'Connell, President, South Devon Conservative Association. We had our own business, and part of our business was a call centre, basically. And we employed some disabled people in the call centre. They were the most reliable people in the whole factory. And that was their life as well, because they lived alone, and they came into work, and that was their social side as well. So couldn't we find some way, instead of having call centres in India, subsidising call centres here to take on more disabled people?
Brilliant. Lady at the back.
Hi, I'm Lucy. I'm from Carers Trust, who are an unpaid carers charity with an we're an umbrella organisation of over 135 local care organisations. It's been touched on already, but I just was really interested to hear from the panel and from Helen in particular around what the government can be doing to supporting people with caring responsibilities into work and to balance caring responsibilities with work. We know that over 1 million people are caring for over 50 hours a week. So yeah, just really interested to hear what we could be doing to incentivise employers and maybe also the wider kind of social care kind of system to make sure that carers aren't kind of overburdened as well.
Okay, and gentleman two rows from back.
Great. Ryan Shorthouse, I'm the chair of Bright Blue. Very thoughtful discussion. There's obviously consensus across parties that anemic economic growth is the sort of principal problem we're facing. The evidence from the 90s and noughties is about 2/3 of the reasoning behind the growth that we received was expanded economic activity. So it's good that you're thinking about tough, necessary measures to increase the number of people who are economically inactive to go into the workplace. There's a bigger pool of people which we can expand economic activity with, and that's older people, particularly older people in receipt of welfare. We've talked a lot about working age benefits, but there's a huge proportion of welfare expenditure that goes on pensioners through the basic state pension, winter fuel payments, free bus passes. So this is a question for Helen, what are the tough and necessary measures that the Conservative Party are going to make to increase the number of older workers in the labour market?
Helen, several for you there, so I'll let you start.
Thank you. So, I mean, I think we have a journey to go on the policy work that we do between the now and the next election. What I have done so far, and it's a thing that I set out earlier, is what are the things that I think the government should do here and now, straight away, to stop spending far too much on welfare and get people working. I think there are some harder questions to look at how we make sure that people are not dropping out of the workforce so much later in life. So we've talked a lot about the young people going, not being in work, but the other area where you've seen a significant increase in economic activity since the pandemic is people in their 50s and into their early 60s. Some of those people, I think, are now going back because they thought they didn't need to work and then go, actually, financially, they do. So that's an interesting scenario. But I think there is a whole piece to do around, and actually I've talked to quite a lot of people who are in that age bracket who want to work, but they need to get a different skill set because before they were doing something which is a relatively physical job, they've got health problems, they need to do something which is not so physical, but they're also not particularly tech savvy, they're not used to using a computer. So how do you help people reskill to be able to do to be economically active later in their life as well, and I think that is a fruitful area for policy work. If Bright Blue is going to be looking at it, I'll be delighted to work with you because we need to work as a wider community of people interested in solving these problems. Caring responsibilities, yes. I mean, as social care minister, you'll know that I did lots of work on this, and I feel very strongly about supporting people who are, whether it's full-time carers or spending a lot of their time caring for a relative, to be able to work as well. And there's a real problem of people who are caring having very little money to live with as well because it's difficult to work. Being able to work flexibly makes a huge difference. That depends on employers supporting flexible working. It also depends on people when they do get flexible working, really working, and you get this kind of different stories of when I talk to employers. There's some saying, yes, I'm flexible with people and they are fantastic, and then hold on, I offered somebody flexibility and actually it just turned out they were walking their dog or whatever it is. So there's something about making sure that flexibility is something that's working for employers as well as for people who need it, and it's something I personally support as a employer. A lot. Richard's question about call centres. So I think you have to be very careful, and Lana, I think you'll be really good at talking about this, of not suggesting that disabled people should be paid less than people without disabilities. But I do think there is a fundamental problem that the government making it very expensive to employ people in general. I hear from employers saying they're less likely to take a chance on people, and they worry about people who don't have a track record, and they worry about people with health conditions. And so that is a problem, despite the fact, as you've said and as others have said today, actually employing somebody with disabilities can be your most loyal employee who always turns up. And some of this is to do with misunderstandings, as I say, but overall, I think there is a point about government backing businesses to employ people, not making it harder for them to employ people.
Great. Lana, I'll come to you next and then to James.
Yeah, so just a few points. So when it comes to employing disabled people, it's the government shouldn't have to subsidise employing people in the UK. I hear what you're saying, but it's a preposterous notion to, government would have to pay people to employ people in their own country. But I can see why you're saying it, but it's nuts, right? It's actually nuts. But we have to make it easier for employers to employ people in this country, full stop. It's become so expensive. And not just that, put on top of that, the prejudices and actually some of the real difficulties of employing somebody with a fluctuating health condition. It's really difficult when you have somebody with, acute asthma who is perfect for the first 3 months and has a problem and ends up spending the next 3 months in hospital while the employer has to cough up for sick leave and pay somebody else to do their job. And I was actually chatting to Nick about how do we bridge that gap for the employers as well as the employees, because the employee needs something to live off and the employer needs that job doing, right? Somebody has to be doing it, and it could come from literally pooling all NI contributions for disabled people, so that when those gaps happen, that there's money available to ensure that there is some sort of cover. And caring, I'm not really well versed, so I won't be addressing that one. But Ryan, I really enjoyed your last article. I thought it was really thoughtful, and I've been meaning to get in touch. So yeah, hopefully we can do some work together. Thank you.
Great, and finally Harry.
I just wanted to come in on the point that, just very respectfully to kind of slightly disagree with what you just said, Lana, which is just there is lots of good evidence that some element of subsidy to employers to take on employees where there's extra cost associated with that employment is really effective. And in the UK, we don't use that mechanism very much. We have in selected cases, as we talked about the Kickstart scheme, those things have worked, and that is part of that was a small subsidy to employers to do that. But in the UK, we spend about 0.5% of GDP on what's called active labour market policies, which are policies where there's some additional incentive to take on employment, compared to a European average of 1% of GDP, and the Nordics, for example, spend 2% of GDP. Now, so I think there is a selective, you have to be very careful about how we use that, but we are already subsidising this because we're paying benefits to people, and that's costing a lot of money. It's better for them, it's better for the employee, and it's better for the employer if we can get them back into work. And if a small subsidy helps that is a net gain for everybody. So I think we should very carefully, you don't want a mass subsidy of work where you're kind of dead weight in terms of putting money in for employment that would have happened anyway. But I think carefully designed, that could be part of the solution.
Can I just quickly come in, Caroline, actually in response to Ryan? So you're right to raise pensioner benefits in this discussion, I think. And I've got a sort of serious point and a semi-serious one. So the serious one is, I think, the tax side of what you asked is quite interesting, actually, in terms of what that means for receipts, but also broader tax treatment if, pensioners are working for longer. And I think that's a conversation we'll need to have as a country. And then look, on pensioner benefits more broadly, just because I can speak slightly more freely these days, I think there's an interesting cartoon photo, which many of you will have seen, of 3 Spider-Men all pointing at each other. And I often wonder, the heading to that should be, who is going to take a hard decision on pensioner benefits first? And it will be Reform, Tories, Labour as our Spider-Men. And I just wonder what you're going to see happen over this Parliament. Is the political space moving when Nigel Farage says the state pension age should go up further and faster? I mean, one thing to say that, another thing to actually have a credible plan. But I do just wonder, are we going to see a shift in this conversation or not in the next few years? It might be something which, by the way, the markets want to see the UK government actually engage with. But I think that would be a whole other hour to get into how we might unpack that one.
And I'm afraid we've only got 1 minute left, so Lana, I'll come to you if you've got any final quick-fire thoughts to wrap up the discussion. If not, we'll move on to the close.
Well, the one thing I'll leave you with is, 380 billion a year by 2030. That's all I need to say. This is not sustainable for our country, and we have to do better.
Brilliant. Well, a huge thank you to everyone for coming along today and to the panel here. If we give them a round of applause to thank for their time. Please do stick around here in the Onward Hub. There's plenty more left to come today. Next up at 2 o'clock, we have Fuel Britannia, about how we can achieve energy abundance, which promises to be lively. And there's plenty more later today. Institute for Government, we're going to be talking about all public services at 3:30. So please do come back. Thank you.